I want to pose a big question, which is why do we have school boards, and begin to give you a sense of where this system of educational governance has come from in Vermont. It's a unique story, and it really has two parallel threads. It really is a reflection of our value of small communities, our values that we can really live in small communities in a way that we want to see reflected in the education of our children. At the same time, of course, we need to take into consideration the forces and factors outside our communities, whether it's at the state boundary, the national boundary, or really the entire world, in ways that our children have access to the broad global evolution of information. So there's this balance between local values, the desire to own the experience that our children have, and to balance that with the skills and experiences and understanding that they'll need to navigate the broad world. So let me summarize here. It's again this idea that the education of our children remains a high priority in each community. The term we like to use is local ownership. To be certain our children are educated in a way that reflects our values. That our local education systems are effective. That ability to know someone on the school board, to be able to raise questions and concerns and offer ideas, and continually evaluate the performance of the school system enables us to make sure it's effective. And finally, by having that close relationship with members of our community, we're able to build strong support for the education of our kids. Another way to understand this evolution is through a brief lesson in history. So, as was the case in much of the country, in Vermont, education started in one-room schoolhouses where children over multiple years were taught by typically an individual teacher that covered a comprehensive curriculum. In fact, in Vermont, into the late 1800s, there were roughly 2,500 individual schoolhouses. That was a function of, again, a local commitment to educating our children, that children would not have to travel more than 3 miles to get to school. And so even in very small communities, there were multiple schools. That structure shifted in the late 1800s, roughly 1892, when we went from almost 2,500 individual one-room schoolhouses to what we have now as local school districts, roughly 288 school districts in the state. Those school districts remain vital and strong. At the same time, or some few number of years later, roughly in the early 1900s, around 1915, we introduced the idea of a superintendent, recognizing that individual schools, through their isolation, were not necessarily able to take advantage of all the resources, newest technology, and training opportunities that could be made available through a superintendent who, as an educational leader and supervisor, provided that training and resource to individual schools and teachers. And so in the beginning, there were what we refer to as circuit riding superintendents covering a geographic area. Of course, over time, that's evolved to a centralization of services for efficiencies and ultimately for the benefit of children's education. We'll talk more about this later in the presentation, but much of the motivation for coordination was to make sure the curriculum was a logical progression for students through their time in the schools. So to summarize this initial picture, I want to use these terms, that trustees, that school boards act as trustees on behalf of the community to provide strong oversight, and in particular to ensure the high quality of education for students, to ensure taxpayers that the public gets a good return on their investment, and to make sure that that system operates effectively and ethically. We'll come back to these last two bullets later on. Again, the parallel with the supervisory union is important, and your role as a board member in a local district has a close and really intimate connection with the supervisory union. Every district is a member of a union, whether it's a single district or multiple town districts in a supervisory union. Mutual accountability is the concept that I want to underscore here. Again, as overseers for education now for the region through the supervisory union, your role is to assure that mutual accountability with the superintendent, all towards seeking greater student opportunity and operating efficiency. And again, we'll talk more about mutual accountability, but it's that notion that the board and the superintendent have clear roles that they can rely on from each other and enable them to do their work well.